What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. I'm Kangas, and today we'll be telling you all the reasons why jungle is absolutely broken in Wild Rift. Now, by that I don't necessarily mean broken as too strong, but literally the role is broken in terms of how it was designed to be played versus how it's actually played right now. It'll make a bit more sense in a minute, so hit that sub button and let's get right into it. Alright, so the first gripe that we have with jungle right now is that the passive experience you gain in general is just overpowered. By simply standing around, you gain enough experience to stay relevant in the game. On top of this, camp gold is a little low, so the amount of prioritization towards clearing camps becomes lower as well. Let's take, for example, attempting to clear Krugs. Yeah, the recent patch 2.3 made it easier to clear the camp, but even then it requires a lot of time to clear the camp and you don't get that much gold payoff. So the time spent to gold payoff ratio just isn't really worth it for junglers to clear. And this then provides a lot of incentive to practically just live in your lanes. The passive gold income from shared minions is still pretty high, even though junglers receive less gold than other roles because they have smite. But since the jungler's presence often shifts the entire tide of the lane, typically granting their allied laner an advantage, the net gain from simply camping lanes rather than focusing on clearing waves is pretty big. What results is junglers will often constantly gank, even ignoring their own jungle camp since there's little reason not to do so. And before long, the lane snowballs out of control and completely takes over the game. Now the big question is, what skill expression is there really in this form of play? I mean, if we use FPS games as an example, we know that camping doesn't take that much skill, and since Wild Rift jungle practically rewards junglers for doing this, the role itself isn't really in a healthy state. Now, depending on the pacing of the game, junglers can dive a lane, kill the lane opponent, and sit in a bush soaking up passive gold and XP until the lane opponent comes back, unknowingly to yet another gank. Rinse and repeat, and that's kind of the meta right now. Take some of the top tier junglers as an example. Evelynn, after her initial clears and learning her ultimate, just spends the rest of the game terrorizing her enemy laners. If the duo lane seems weak, she'll gank the duo lane over and over, picking on the squishy AD carry and supports and bullying them from ever scaling into the game. I mean, what can the enemy laners realistically do to a champion that's constantly invisible and burst them down almost immediately? And with the addition of Rengar, we have a champion that is literally rewarded for sitting in a bush. With the amount of passive gold and XP gained, in addition with the hop from his auto attack while in that bush, there's almost no reason for him to not constantly camp a vulnerable and weak lane. And again, let's be honest, sitting in a bush waiting for the enemy to walk up really doesn't take that much skill. Now, I'm sure lots of you have experienced this before, but being camped constantly by the enemy jungler and losing your lane primarily because of their presence, it's really not a fun experience to go through. And on the other hand, it's really not that hard for a jungler to execute. But we get it, jungle can be a pretty tough role to learn initially, so if you're struggling learning the role, check out our Ultimate Challenger Jungle Guide alongside our Beginner Jungle video. These two videos will teach you pretty much everything you know to get started in the role. But before we go on, we got our question of the day. Who's your favorite jungle champion to either play with or just have on your team in Wild Rift? Even though I loathe her with a burning passion, I do appreciate having an Evelynn on my team because she's so strong and watching the enemy AD carry gets one shot is always fun. But let me know yours in the comments down below and let's get back to the video. Now, we've been talking a lot about how weak the jungle monster camps are, but let's go a bit more into detail. Typically, a jungler's passing will have them clear a buff, then raptors, then wolves. This will grant them level 3 and therefore access to their base abilities. They'll take another buff after for the additional sustain or utility, and then go for a gank if lanes are prepped, or go for the scuttle crab. Of course, this will differ slightly depending on the champion, since some champs prefer to get level 5 before ganking, but as a whole, most will ignore Gromp and most will ignore Krugs early on. Yeah, these both have been updated in patch 2.3a, but they're still not quite worth the clearing during the early stages of the game. Now, why do junglers choose this specific path pretty much all the time? Well, the rest of the jungle camps, Gromp and Krug, simply take too long to clear. We already said this before and elaborated a bit on it, but there are just so many better alternatives to focus instead. Like, why would you ever clear Krugs over chickens? Or focus Gromp instead of killing the squishy, lucrative wolves? Clearing them in your own jungle grants little to no advantage for the jungler. After all, Gromp and Krugs don't grant vision, and they don't provide buffs. Overall, your own allied jungle camps are a priority only during the initial stages of the game, in order to learn your abilities. But thereafter, the general guideline for jungle camp priority goes as such: enemy jungle, neutral camps, and allied jungle. Now, why is that? Well, enemy jungle camp should be top priority because stealing enemy camps effectively takes away gold from the enemy. If you take 150 gold away from the enemy jungler, they can't recover that gold. Whereas if you get 150 gold from your own camp, it's just that. So, stealing an enemy camp worth 150 gold is actually a net gain of 300 gold. This makes camps like Gromp and Krugs practically only useful when you really have nothing else to do, or if you're stealing it from the enemy. If you have vision of them, or if you know that in a 1v1 matchup you'll win against the enemy jungler, stealing a monster camp actually places you closer to the potential action, since it positions you in the enemy laner's rear. And by positioning towards the rear, if your allied laner effectively pushes into the tower, then as a jungler, you can absolutely destroy the enemy with a properly executed dive. This makes for an overwhelmingly powerful play, leaving little chance of escape for the enemy, especially if the enemy jungler isn't aware. Nobody on the map really pays enough attention and communicates properly enough to the point where they'll rotate fast enough to help out. And what results in this kind of play is that the jungler often gains complete dominance of the lanes that they gank. If the gank is successful, junglers are rewarded for pushing in the tower, since outer turret plating grants even more gold now. Once again, the point is, there's just not that many incentives to properly farm your own jungle camps when there's so many aspects of the game that grant more rewards as a whole. And without as much prioritization around the jungle camps, the overall skill expression for junglers drops drastically. Right now, junglers don't really need that much knowledge on pathing, and rather simply need to understand how to properly fight with their given champion. I mean, the fact that Camille and Riven jungle are completely viable in Wild Rift should speak volumes to the sentiment. These are two pretty capable junglers, in fact. And Camille jungle is even played competitively. They're not strong junglers because they have powerful abilities to fast clear camps, or even a steady stream of DPS to solo dragons, but rather because they are incredibly effective during skirmishes. They got crowd control, gap closers, and to be frank, just lots of burst damage, which grants them the necessary tools to wreck enemy champs. Jungle, at least in League PC, revolves heavily around understanding pathing and the intricacies around it. Very skilled players even know how to take two camps at once, such as Blue Buff and Gromp, taking both aggros while dealing damage to both simultaneously. This amount of nuance is nowhere to be seen in Wild Rift, an essential aspect to create more skill expression in the jungle. To fix this, we think that more priority needs to be given to camps in general. The recent jungle changes in patch 2.3a are definitely going in the right direction, since they decrease the total amount of health that both Gromp and Krugs have, and thereby decreasing the amount of time that players have to waste in order to clear those camps. Hopefully more and more similar changes will be added to help balance out the jungle. But since so many priorities outside of the jungle have such lucrative incentives right now, perhaps Riot should further decrease passive gold and XP as a whole, even if specifically for junglers. This would provide more incentive for junglers to actually clear their camps and potentially create a more prevalent counter jungle meta, which is a much better method of skill expression than just sitting idly in a bush. Now, all the broken aspects of jungle are expedited by the smaller size of the map in Wild Rift. In League PC, since the lanes are all much further apart, the direction and pathing of which junglers choose to get to lanes for a gank is significantly more important, and there's a lot more time to react to a missing champion. But in Wild Rift, having a smaller map allows junglers to get from one lane to another in just a few seconds, increasing the overall speed in which junglers can gank. If a jungler can successfully gank one lane, then successfully gank another immediately after, the game pretty much snowballs out of control. Added in with this all the variables mentioned before, ganking lanes as a jungler holds so much power that the role itself needs more balancing. Of course, it's not necessarily fair to compare Wild Rift to League PC all of the time, and scrutinizing its issue so blatantly. I mean, Wild Rift should be simpler, and therefore the flaws that persist in the jungle are relatively acceptable. But this doesn't mean that change can't be made. Some aspects just can't be changed without destroying the game environment, like the map size and general fast-paced nature of the game, but by adding small quality of life changes, like the jungle changes that we saw in patch 2.3a, we hope that the jungle role will slowly but surely become more balanced. So to conclude the video, we have our last topic regarding the jungle, the epic monsters. We just can't talk about the jungle without discussing these pinnacle objectives. Dragons provide fantastic buffs to the team, but honestly won't drastically change the tides of a game unless stacked with Elder Dragon or two other elemental drakes. They're more symbolic objectives, especially during the early game in regards to reflecting the power dynamic between the two teams. So don't throw your games just because the enemy team secured the first dragon. It's really not the end of the world. Maybe your team's early game is just weaker. That one lost dragon does not secure your defeat. One huge tip that we can give you is, if the dragon seems like it's lost and there's only a 10% chance of stealing it, don't go for it. Instead, try and get your team to group up around another objective. The worst thing you can do as a jungler, or actually on any role, is to let the enemy gain objectives for free. You need to do your best to get any form of leads separate from the lost objective in order to compensate. So if you see 4 people on Dragon, and your team only has 3, try and go for Rift Herald instead. Or try to push for a turret and gain some extra platings alongside Global Turret Destruction Gold. Don't throw your life away to try and steal an objective that's most likely already lost. Anyway, an aspect that I'm sure every Wild Rift player already knows is that junglers are in a unique position to secure objectives. This grants them even more power and responsibility, especially in regards to Baron and Elder Dragon. Now these objectives are another story, because losing either of these two epic monsters can very well spell the end of the game, so do your best as the jungler to secure them. Well, those are our thoughts on the reason why jungle is broken currently. We hope you enjoyed today's video, and always let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And while you're there, don't forget to answer our question of the day as well. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like the video, sub to the channel so you never miss out on our future uploads. But most importantly, best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.